Hey, welcome back to another Steve Jackson Games Live, everybody. I'm Jimmy, and today we've got Ben here with us. We're going to do a hobby stream today. Ben's going to be painting some miniatures for our upcoming Foes 2 set of 3D printed miniatures. But we'll be looking at those in a little closer detail and covering that. What are we using today, paint-wise?
All right, so if you guys have watched before, you've heard me talk about my favorite line of paints in the world, Formula P3. And I don't like to use a wet palette, but things have changed in the last month or so. It just stemmed out of me having such a hard time finding P3. So I heard a lot of really good things about this AK acrylic line, and the store very close to me started stocking them, so I can just.
Hang on, guys. Both your mics are out.
Oh, all right. Hey, take care of it real quick. Just get some batteries. Nope. Nope. Turn off the
That's what it says.
Get this open.
But these batteries look weird because they're really bad, because they're really good.
They're rechargeable.
Oh, that is good. No, it's wet.
Right here, replace it. Be right back with you here. Sorry for the delay.
All right, check, check. Looks like I'm back. I can see the little line bouncing up and down.
Good.
All right, and there we go. All right, so sorry about that, everyone. Let's start over. Welcome back to Steve Jackson Games Live.
Welcome back.
I'm Jimmy, and this is Ben, and you've seen us talking, and now you can hear us. We're gonna do a hobby stream this week. Hunter's out, so we're gonna cover some painting. We're gonna be doing some painting of the Foes 2 miniatures that are gonna be in a part of an upcoming project of 3D printed miniatures that we're doing. Wanted to keep you updated. We have a current project running right now for some nano games related to the ocean dice that we've been putting out this year, series of ocean themed dice. This is like our last nano games project with the dragon and Halloween dice. So it's 2 little games that go with these dice sets. You can find those on our current Indiegogo project that Brandon will be linking down there or over there or whichever side the chat is on your preferred application that you're watching us on today. So go ahead and check that out. It's going to be running for, I think, about 6 or 7 more days. But go ahead and back those and we'll get those printed out to you. Basically, it's a big fold-out sheet that folds down to like a card-sized thing. It folds out, has the rules for one game on one side, the other game on the other side.
And it comes with the dice, right?
I think the dice are some backer levels have the dice in it. It depends on which level you choose.
Okay.
To back it at, like the PDF doesn't come with dice, obviously.
Obviously.
And that
So for people who already have
the dice,
you can get the rules. People who don't have the dice,
you can
get both.
Yeah.
Okay.
So check that out. And what we were going into after that was we've got some different paints today, and Ben was talking about why that is.
Yeah. My favorite to usually use are these Formula P3s, and I've been using them for years. I still like them, but it's just been harder and harder to get them. Shopping online for them, usually no store has all the ones I want, so I got to shop at multiple stores, and no store in town carries them anymore. So after hearing a lot of good things about these AK paints, after a long, long time, I finally switched brands, and these are really good. They are very, very vibrant. They blend pretty well, and the only thing that I really don't like about them is that they tend to chip a little easily, but if you just blast them with some sealant, once you're done, like you should anyway, that usually solves that problem, and they're good to go for gaming or whatever. Now, because they come in dropper bottles, I also sort of use this opportunity to take the long overdue step of moving to a wet palette, which now that I've gotten the hang of it and sort of incorporated it into, my normal painting routine, I really like it. This is just a really cheap Masterson's. It was on Amazon and it was quite inexpensive, and you can see I've already spilled a big glob of paint on it.
That's what I got.
Yeah, so this is really good, inexpensive. One of the pieces of advice that I got from people trying to talk me into using it is to replace the paper that it comes with grocery store parchment paper. and I am against that. I like the paper that it came with. It's more absorbent. The parchment paper that I got was very waxy, and it sort of seemed to defeat the whole purpose of having a wet palette. But this is more spongy, so the water soaks in from the bottom, and just like what you want, you just put the lid on it, and all the colors that you've been blending with will be good when you come back and paint some more the next day. So, back to the actual minis we're going to be painting. These are Foes 2. So Foes 1, we kickstarted, I believe it was earlier this year, fairly recently. That had orcs and orcs and orcs, and it also had
Some skeletons, right?
it had some skeletons, and it had a nice long Lankin and some scorpions. So mostly humanoids. This one is going to be a little bit more creature focused. It will have some zombies, but definitely rats and snakes, and I think there's some others. It has some other cool stuff too. I never know exactly how much I'm supposed to be revealing at any given time, and Hunter's not here to vet what I might be revealing,
We'll
so I
stick
don't
with
want
the
to
ones that
go
we're doing
into.
on screen then.
Yeah, so snakes and rats.
I could have
Just
used those
general-
snakes when we did the TFT live play a couple years back.
Exactly,
I had
and
to
then
sculpting my own.
yeah, now we'll have them. And so
All right, I'm going to get out of your way, Ben.
Okay.
And, run chat back there, but enjoy.
So snakes, you can use snakes a lot of different ways. Obviously, snakes in the wild can have some interesting colors, but usually it's some variation of green or brown. But this is a fantasy game, and hey, once you print them out, they're your models. So I say you can kind of do whatever you really want. So I'm going to be going to try some purples and some bluish greens and see what we end up with this guy. Now, unfortunately, his little handle, I don't know, you guys have seen me bring these handles every time to help me get a good grip on whatever I'm painting. So he snapped right off of that on the way here. He has a little bit of nubbin to hang on to on the bottom. It's going to be a little trickier to paint than I was hoping, but I'm sure it won't matter that much. So, for fantasy snakes, I say just let your imagination go as crazy as you want it to. So I'm going to give him kind of a purplish pink belly. We're going to give him some greenish blue body scales, him or her. We don't really know. It's hard to tell with snakes. And then once that has begun to dry, I guess I will switch to the rat. Sorry, Brandon, I can see I'm making you jump all around with the camera. It's hard to stop moving. All right, so we got some deep violet. That's also the kind of funny thing about the AK paints is after years of using Privateer and GW that have, ridiculous names for everything like gangrenous green and like troll snot yellow. Like this company's just like, it's deep violet. Do we really need to say anything else? It's just deep violet. Black is just called black. I can't
What?
remember the last time
It's not
it's
like
just black.
Soul of the Void or anything
Right,
like
exactly. No, it's just black. So that actually took a little getting used to.
I'd buy me some Soul of the Void paint.
That's
Awesome.
probably a turbo door color. Let's face it.
I
It
hope so.
probably is.
Like black with glitter or something.
Yeah.
Steve was hanging out with them last night. They revealed, I don't know what they were, but they revealed some new colors at their Dragon's Lair painting night here in town last night. And Steve was hanging out with them up there doing some painting.
Yep. I saw the picture he was talking about it too in the meeting today. Had a lot of fun. I met some Car Wars players,
All right.
is what he said.
Moses, it's definitely true. Just tell me what the colors are. I don't need the fancy names.
Yeah. All right, and this is Esmerald, not Emerald, but Esmerald.
It's a little off the.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think it's they are not. I don't think the company is from an English-speaking country, so I have to assume. My guess is, whatever country they're in, Emerald translates to Esmerald,
That could be.
and that's why it has that name. Now these are some really cool models, and I hope you guys can see on your end. But these snakes, And because like I was saying, there are a few of them. They have the most amazingly sculpted scales. They have those big, thick, kind of diamond-shaped, sort of viper or rattlesnake scales, and they just coil perfectly around the body. They're really cool. Um, and that's the sort of thing that you can get looking really good, even with just some dry brushes and washes. Um, so I think people will have a lot of fun with these, and you'll be able to get some really cool looking ones without too much effort. All right, so our boy or girl snake is going to chill for a little while. Hopefully, it won't take too long to dry. And I'm going to move on to this vile, disgusting rat. So these rats are really something else, as they say. Their fur is all matted and splotchy. They have lots of exposed skin, and they have all these gross sores all over their bodies. So these are
Yuck.
really some vile and nasty rats.
What's wrong with them?
They've got some kind of disease, is what they have. I don't know what it is. I don't want it.
Unspecified plague,
Yeah,
which is another GW thing.
right. um, so rats. This is another one where I'm gonna do this one a little bit more realistic, but you can go pretty crazy with your rat. You know what? Maybe I will. We're actually gonna go for like kind of a more bluish skin. Look, make this guy just look really sick and unhealthy. I'm gonna try to squeeze some warmer colors in the highlights. But again, just to show you, there's no wrong way to do it. Any crazy idea you come up with, you can make it work. Now, one of the weird things, if you do go for the more traditional like pink skin, you can just use a human flesh kind of tone. And one of the reasons why that does work really well on gross guys like this is because once you've got those nasty pustules painted, it just sort of feels a little bit more gross when it's on natural looking skin. You know what I mean? Like if it's on this blue skin like I'm doing, which hopefully will still look cool, it doesn't quite like register as much, if you follow me. Like it doesn't quite feel as gross because it doesn't look as real. But it can still look cool. All right, so we've got some blue. This is gray blue. Hey, there you go. Does it look like a gray blue? Yes. What's it called? Gray blue. All right, done. Not like Midnight Shadow.
How's the consistency?
You do need to shake these pretty thoroughly.
It's
That
a
is another
thick
problem
paint.
I've kind of run into. Sorry?
It's like a thick paint.
No. It's about what I'm used to. It's
Okay.
I mean, we can bring the palette in here. And you can, let me see. Wrong way.
Yep.
So you can see like it's pretty wet. My brush is a little bit wet, but it's not thick. And this is basically the consistency I like. I am more than happy to do multiple coats rather than put on paint too thick and risk kind of obscuring the detail.
Right.
So this is kind of thinnish, and that's what I want.
I just mean compared to like Vallejo, I feel is a lot smoother to apply than something like Army Painter, which feels real thick when I'm working with it.
Yeah, that's what I've heard. Army Painter is very thick. Now Vallejo, I've always wanted to try, but it is so popular that the few places around that I've seen carry it in person, it's the stock is always just so picked through. And I really like to stick to the same brand. And of course, now it's a little bit, just trying a couple of Vallejo colors is a lot more realistic because I'm using this wet palette, but it was a little odd when I was mostly using Privateer press colors because I'm just using those straight out of the bottle, and then I have this dropper paint, like, it's just, doesn't quite mesh. But maybe I'll try some. But yeah, whenever I look for Vallejo, they're just like mostly sold out. So I've never really used them. Games Workshop paints do tend to be a little bit thicker too. I haven't really tried them on the wet palette yet, but I have some, probably like 60 Gene Stealer Cultists that I got really excited and assembled around the time their book came out last year, and then I never really painted them.
Oh.
So they're just sitting there. So I need to get back to them soon. And whenever I do, I'm going to need to match the color with the Gene Stealer colors I've already been using, which means GW paints. So we'll see how those work on the wet palette. All right, so this is a wine red. This is a great color. These colors, and especially this one, it seems, are so saturated that you really have to go and give your brush a few extra swishes in the water when you go to clean it off. Because all the time I'll be painting and I'll end up with the previous color back on what I'm doing, and that can be bad depending on what you're up to, especially if you have like a little area on your wet palette where you've blended like just the right color and you accidentally like add a bunch of red from a brush that you haven't properly cleaned out. Yeah, that sucks.
Okay.
But I mean, that does mean that there's just some really great pigment they're using. It means they're putting a lot of pigment into the paint.
Where did you say you got these?
Game Castle.
Okay.
And what's weird, if any of the listeners or viewers happen to be from Austin, despite the fact that Game Castle has what looks like a full display, there are a lot more colors that they don't have. And I picked up some of those on eBay from a seller who had some minis I wanted. And those are also really interesting. One of the ones that I have found the range to be lacking so far is like a really nice saturated sort of dark warm purple. So I've actually grabbed this Reaper one, which is Imperial Purple, which does a pretty good job. I've been using that a lot. But that's really about it. They have this Amethyst Blue that's really more of a deep purple. That's a great color too. But it's a purple with more blue in it, whereas the Imperial Purple is more warm. All right, Snake, how you doing? Everybody's still a little wet. This is always the problem with paint streams. The paint does not care if you are, working within a limited time frame. It's just going to dry however quickly it does. That's just life.
Boaz, these are the AK interactive paints?
Yes.
Yeah.
They also do a lot of like military colors, which I've used a few of those. The ones I got were on sale, and I think they were past their expiration date because they've been very chunky, and the consistency is so different from the interactive ones that I feel like it must just be like age or something. But I don't know. Maybe they're supposed to be that way for some reason. All right, Rat. Well, maybe I can start dry brushing a little on the Snake. He's got just a little bit of wet paint just way down deep in the crevices. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to get some greenish white. I kid you not. That is lit like not lilac or what, just no, greenish.
That's
greenish
great.
White. Although lilac's kind of a purple. So we got that. I'm going to mix a little bit of the Esmerald into it for the first pass. And I'm also going to add some of this green. This is the only one that's not just like super literal frog green. This is a super, super saturated bright green. And I've been using it on some aliens that I've been painting. And it's just the greatest little weird alien skin tone.
Tree frog green almost.
Yeah. But it's it doesn't really look like in the bottle as saturated as it is, and it just goes on so bright and vibrant.
Bo Paints Minis asks, are there any other colors you'd recommend to start? He's got a whole wall of paints now.
I mean, the starter colors are usually just the most. I don't know, if you have a whole wall of paints already, then I would say get some frog green just because it's so vibrant. It's just it's just really easy to work with too. I found it really easy to blend with in a way that and it's opaque in a way that a lot of the really light greens that I've used from other companies, like Privateer Press's Necrotite green, is kind of similar, as is Citadel's, GW's Moot green. But this is just, it's a little more yellow and it's so bright if you already have a big collection, this might be one to add. The wine red is another one. It's just so vibrant. It's great for shading skin tones, and you can kind of wash it on if it's like a gross zombie or something where you want like this sort of slight appearance of maybe blood or something, which is what I've been doing with little blue rat over here. And then the Esmerald, again, it's just such a rich, really nice, vibrant color. They also have some pretty good yellows. Yellows are always tricky. But I think those are my three big ones. What I also like is they have some of these. That's not quite right. Let me see if I can find the one. I think I brought all the ones I bought. Oh, yeah. So, like this dark sea blue, it's almost black, but it's toned with just a little bit of color. So it can be just a really good shade because it will just make something just a little bit more saturated than it would, if you just use black. So that could be a good one to try too.
Yeah, he says yellow and orange give him fits all the time.
Yeah, I mean, it's I don't want to like oversell it. It's not perfect. It's still a little bit of a more tricky color, but it's good. All right, so dry brushing on this sort of green mixture. I think I've still got a little bit too much paint on my brush. When you dry brushing, it's pretty literal. When you dry brush, you want a brush that feels almost dry. So get as much of there off as you can, and you just kind of go at it. And yep, just like I thought, all those scales are really popping. They're really well defined. It's a really good print on a good 3D printer too.
These were printed here, right?
I don't know if Eric printed them here or if Jean printed them wherever she lives. I forgot to ask. And then mailed them in.
Yeah, these are resin printed on one of our resin printers, either the Office one or Jean's.
Yeah. All right, so I've added a little bit more of the greenish white to the mix. I'm gonna try to get that nice and dry, maybe a little bit more white. When you're dry brushing, it often helps to be a little less subtle than otherwise. So I'm gonna try to do some of that. The more greenish white on. And I am, unfortunately, because I am, we only have a limited amount of time today, and parts of him are still slightly wet. I am picking up a little bit of that as I try to dry brush, so it's not quite perfect like I want it to be.
How long do you usually wait before doing something like dry brushing?
I like till it's dry. Normally I'm going to be painting 5 or 6 models at a time, and maybe that's something I should like. I've thought about doing that, but then it's like even less likely that I'll get one of them finished. So it's just not an issue, because by the time I get done with the last one, usually the
Right.
first one will be dry.
Yeah, I almost always work in batches.
I didn't realize I got some uneven paint on this guy. Let's fix that belly scale, and then I think I'm going to give this guy a purple wash on those belly scales. And then maybe some red eyes later on. All right. So hopefully you guys can see the difference in the definition on those scales after that dry brush, but they're really seeming to pop a lot more for me. All right, and let's go back to the rat. I'm gonna take a little greenish white, mix it with that grayish blue for a highlight. Sort of start going down the tail, sort of like stippling. If this was a real super high quality like studio or competition paint job, I need to be a little bit more wary of the blending, but For today, I think just kind of splotching on these highlights is going to work pretty well. I can always go back maybe and do a little wash or something. And then we have some skin tones out that I did. There are more, but so for now, I've only bought light flesh and basic skin tone. And that's been enough to get me by so far, but I might need some darker colors to shade with at some point. I'm going to give a little bit of a... Who is coming and going out there? No, anyone else was in the office. It's giving me the creeps. No, nothing. Hopefully people can't hear those doors opening and closing on the camera.
Probably not up these mics.
We'll never know because we can't see.
Yep.
Hopefully it's not the tentacle monster from the warehouse.
No.
Be a little less clacky out, a little more squelchy, I would think.
Yeah, it's a little more wet sounding when that thing shows up.
So I'm using some of that lighter flesh color as a highlight. Man, this poor guy, this poor rat is really running into some trouble here. It's got all sorts of gross, like, scabrous skin going on. What's really peculiar about, like, gross things like this, whether it's, like, this icky, like, plague rat or something else like a zombie, weirdly, like, you can just use a whole rainbow of colors on things like that, and that's how they get kind of the coolest. Like, if you look at, like the Nurgle stuff that the Golden Demon quality painters do. Like there's just like every color you can imagine is in there somewhere. There's like red and purples in the shadows and blues and yellows and greens in the highlights and pinks, just everything. And when you get it in that proper balance, that's what creates that really like just cool look with those kind of gross plaguey models where you're like simultaneously disgusted and like fascinated. That's how you do it. It's just using literally every color. That's the secret.
It's like a cacophony of colors going on through the whole thing.
Yeah. But the trick, like, you don't notice it unless you're really looking. You're just like, this thing looks cool and gross, and it looks gross, but I can't stop looking at it. It's only when you like really try to dissect it and figure out what they did to make it look so cool that you start noticing all the colors hidden throughout it. And I mean, maybe that's what that guy needs. Or this guy, I mean, this little rat. All right. I should probably start doing some fur. Now, it usually helps to start light and then shade, 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 because you don't want to just like go in there with black and just sort of weigh down the whole model. So I'm going to try some of this middle stone, which is, it's kind of like a yellow ochre, sort of a yellowish gray or maybe a grayish yellow, or a middle stone, I guess. But this should be a good base for the fur.
They were doing so well with the descriptive color names, but I'm not really sure what that's referring to.
It's not a light stone. It's not a dark stone.
It's a middle stone.
And I guess that part of it is they already have a yellow ochre that's more of a golden color. And this is one that was not on the display. So if anyone who listens happens to have a display of AK Interactive paints at their local game store, like I do, you might not notice that yellow ochre because it might not be there because it's not at the one that I know of. And yeah, I don't know, like when you have a big cool painting rack, like you see at game stores, I don't know if they just, I always assume they send them packed, like they send them with what they want on them. But maybe the store owners or the stock orderers decide which paints go on it. I just thought it was
Usually
weird that
when-
there were so many colors that weren't on it. Usually they put all the colors on those things.
Yeah, usually I've seen in those distributor catalogs that you can buy a whole rack paint set like that comes with everything in it already.
Yeah, and that's what was weird about this one. It's
But
not everything.
Well, it may have been
I'm gonna guess you sell out of certain colors faster than others, and then you just replace them with whatever you can.
most
Yeah,
of them also have like, here's your like standard rack and your deluxe rack and your
Right.
complete rack.
Yeah, there's a few different ones.
yeah. Maybe it's just the deluxe rack and not the complete rack.
Like I know
Right.
at I think it was Origins this year. Like Army Painter had like a airbrush rack and a normal brush rack that they were pitching to retailers,
Hmm.
like for their airbrush line of paints and their brush line of paints.
Yeah, they're
All
coming
right.
out with a lot of paint.
Let's let that fur dry for a second. Now, I believe I brought along some old GW washes. I still use the GW washes because obviously these are ones where washes are something I still want in the big pot because if you can't really pour them onto a wet palette. So if you're going to use washes from dropper bottles, you need like something else set up, like one of those little palettes with all the bowls in them, but then you got to clean it or they dry it anyway. It looks like I neglected to bring the purple wash. But hey, you can use this Coelia green shade. No, you know what? I do want to do a purple wash. So you can always make your own washes. The difference
a container?
between, sorry?
Do you need a container for that?
No, I'm just gonna water down some paint. You can always make your own washes just by watering down paint. The difference between a wash and just thin down paint is really the binder, and the pigment type. In a wash, the pigment's going to be a little bit more translucent because you want them. The design by design you want to be able to see the colors underneath, and it's also probably going to have a different binder because when you water down paint, the binder, the like acrylic medium that hardens and holds in those pigment particles, that's also going to get thinned down. So just thinned down paint used as a wash has a tendency to dry much more unevenly. But it can still be done. It still works okay. In a pinch, as I find myself in here. So I just put some of that purple I was showing earlier, the Reaper Imperial Purple, on my palette. And I'm just adding some water, swishing the brush around. And the other problem when you're just using paint, looks like I thinned this a little too much. I need to add a little bit more pigment. The other problem when you're just trying to use thin paint as a wash is it's really hard to get it at the right consistency where it flows into the cracks just the way you want. Because if it's too thin, you're not gonna be able to see it, but just a little bit thicker, thick enough that it needs to be to really bind, it may be too opaque, and you lose a lot of the subtlety of it getting into those cracks that you would from a real ink wash. So that's why ink washes are cool, and you shouldn't just try to thin your paint down and use them from scratch. So this one, I don't know how well you can see it. It's doing okay, but it's darkened the belly scales a lot, and it's not quite seeping into the crevices the way we want it to. But it'll still do okay. Let's see. I'm gonna let that dry a bit. How's this rat doing? He's still drying, but I think what I can do is work on his mouth. So let's get a pretty good pink for that mouth, even though the rest of him is blue. So that way it'll just, sort of pop and stand out. So this time I'm going to be using the deep purple, not the same as deep violet. This is a little bit warmer. And I'm going to mix some of that with the basic skin tone. Let's just fill his mouth up with that. Get the tongue. This guy is so gross. His tongue actually has pustules on it. Like, that's how infected this rat is. I hope you TFT players, or really anybody, because you don't have to just use these minis for TFT, but I hope you guys are ready for your parties to just be completely grossed out.
That sounds really
Because
uncomfortable.
this dude is nasty. This dude or dudette, I don't know. I can't help it. I just always call these minis guys or dudes.
Probably why he's so angry.
Because I keep misgendering him, or because
No,
he's
because
covered
he's
in
got
pustules?
pustules on his tongue. You know?
There we go. Yeah, that would. Wow. Yeah, that would suck. Trying to figure out what to do next on it. Oop. I'm gonna go back with a little bit more of the wine red, specifically around the pustules. So I'm gonna try to make them look more inflamed. And then once that dries, I'm gonna put a little bit of white at the top of each dot, so it'll look like a really gross infected pustule. Sometimes it can be a little hard to tell the scabrous skin from the pustules. It has really patchy fur on its legs too, and I'm having a kind of a hard time figuring out where the patchy fur ends and the gross scabby skin begins. This is a rat where if I saw a real rat like this, despite being an animal lover and thinking rats are pretty awesome, I would probably want it to be put out of its misery. It's not doing well, y'all.
Definitely wouldn't want that in my house.
No. So my point being, if your party encounters this rat, you're doing it a favor by slaying it. And let's I've got some deep red here. Oh, there we go. Yep, deep red. So that's kind of your basic warm clown nose red. And I'm going to use some of that for the eyes. Maybe the snake can have some nice bright red eyes too, since I've got it out already.
So, chat, what's the grossest monster you've painted that's not that without straying into like eldritch horror territory and stuff? Like,
I mean, I did paint a Great Unclean one a long, long time ago, and that's pretty gross. I mean, there's a lot of minis on that back burner. I just painted a guy pretty recently, Gawk the Corpse Collector, who's a Bushido model, which is from GCT Studios, and he has just these really bizarre, like, growths on his back. And he has a little cart full of rotting corpses. It's pretty nasty. Killjoy from Malifaux is like some kind of weird, gross, bloated, demonic murder baby with exposed intestines. So he was pretty gross. Oh, and the Kentoroi from Malifaux as well. Those are centaurs, except they're not centaurs because they're like human corpses stitched to horse corpses. So it's like a centaur made through horrible, grotesque
like a
Frankensteining.
Franken-centaur.
Yeah, and they also have some really gross exposed guts that I painted. So those guys are pretty gross.
How about you guys watching? What's the grossest thing you've ever painted or played with as far as a model goes?
I'm gonna see if I keep thinking about it. I'm not gonna be talking, and I should probably be saying stuff to keep the stream from becoming dull. All right, so I've got my off-white out now, and yes, it's literally just called off-white. So we're gonna be giving little gross white tips to these pustules on the tail, and you just want to get a tiny little bit if you can. He's got some on his fur as well. Try to get those in there. And some more up here at the top of the tail. I meant to bring in the other when I finished, which I did in a more sort of natural style with more warm flesh tones. But it just was not in my box when I got here. So hopefully I can still find it because I spent kind of a while on it. And I would hate to lose it. Hopefully I just forgot it and it's still on the painting table. And it didn't fall out of my box at some point on the way here. All right, so this is another time where washes are good. I actually have a wash that will do well on this fur, just plain old Agrax Earthshade. There's even a, I don't know, did we do an Agrax card in Munchkin 40K? Like paint it with Agrax Earthshade? I know we talked about it. I don't know if it ever became a
I
card.
don't know if that
Like
was the one.
go up a level.
Yeah. Because it's just like this is everybody's favorite. Like you airbrush something with one color, then you hit it with Agrax Earthshade. It's done.
Yeah.
It's good for it's ready to hit the table and play 40K with. So I know we talked about like an Agrax Earthshade joke for
It's a good wash.
for Munchkin 40K. Yeah.
It's very that and the Nuln oil. Those are my two favorites.
Yep. And so you can see it just like goes right in there. I didn't have to thin it down or anything. It's just gonna find its way into all those little creases and stuff. Do very good that way. And that's what you want a wash to do. You want it to leave a good portion of that original color exposed and then just work as a shadow. Now, if somehow you are not familiar with Devlin Mud, it's basically a black with a little bit of warm tone in it, kind of making a really dark brown. And if you just want black, that's what the Nuln oil that Brandon was talking about is. That's just pure black.
Or like engine grease. It's crazy.
Yeah.
Kind of stuff.
Yeah, and hence the name, hence the oil part of the name. One thing I've had luck with doing recently is if you're a little worried that the ink wash might be a little too dark on the surface, if you take a wet rag, like a wet cotton rag, and you can very gently dab off just the stuff on the surface, and it will leave the wash in the recesses. I should specify not a wet rag, a damp rag, like a fairly damp cloth, because you don't want to get it any more wet than it already is. You're pulling up the wash rather than depositing water. The last thing you want to do is make it wetter, because then it won't look as good. That's going to take
the wash.
it. Yeah, that's going to take it a little while. And so we're back to the snake. And unfortunately, this is kind of exactly what I was talking about. So because it wasn't a real wash, it's basically just, now that it's dry, the whole area is just sort of a uniform darker purple. But that's not a problem. I have that light purple that I used in the first place. Now I can just do that as a dry brush. Make sure I get enough paint off the brush.
There you go.
So Trasherama says Kingdom Death has some pretty gross things.
Yeah, they do.
Definitely they do.
And
I actually did begin to paint a wet nurse, but I did not finish it. I had forgotten all about that. I was going for a flayed flesh look on that thing, and it probably would have been cool. I got one of the weird, if anybody's curious, that guy, he tested out a polystyrene plastic casting method and he didn't like it. And he sold the ones that he did cast as the experiment of death. So that's what I got. And yeah, the polystyrene wasn't that great. And a real resin one would have been much more cool. And that's probably one of the things that led to me abandoning that project. But I mean, part of the other thing is just like, I'm a gamer, so I want anything I paint, usually I want it to be in some game I'm playing, and I just didn't know what that wet nurse would ever go to. So that's part of it, was there's probably like some new release for a game I was really into at the time, and I wanted that painted and on a table so I could play with it, and the wet nurse was just for show.
Bo says his was the big RAFM Yarlathotep. Painted it in a layered gory red, and it turned out pretty well.
A long time ago, I did a manticore for an undead army that I did like a flayed flesh look, and that turned out pretty cool. I have no idea where that model ended up. That was something I did in like high school. Like that could be in the bottom of a bits box. It could be traded to somebody for some other model years ago. Who knows where that ended up? You know, this palette I'm using, the snake looked like it's ready for Easter. Like a nice lively green and kind of a pastel purple. Trying to figure out what else you can do. So, I mean, obviously snakes have all sorts of patterns all over their body. So maybe it needs something purple going down its back. Let's give that a shot. Why not? Or should it be something even brighter, like a red or an orange?
Go kind of like jungle snake with it.
Yeah, you know, I'm going to do an orange just because we're talking about orange being a little difficult. So I can show how I do orange. So I'm going to start not with,
Orange.
for some reason, they name their oranges rust. So we got dark rust and light rust.
Huh.
Light rust is just, I mean, it's orange by any other name. It is very orange. It's your typical orange. Dark rust, I would call kind of an orange ochre and a dark one at that. So I start with this as a base. Depending on how light you want to get it, you can add a little bit of the orange to it to start with. But this will mean that when the lighter orange itself goes on, it should be a little bit clearer and cleaner. I don't know, let's start at the head, and then we can just sort of do splotches. One of the weird things when I do paint, you know, scaly things, you always, this is sort of inherent, like if I'm going to do a pattern, it needs to sort of perfectly overlap the scales, but that's not really how they work in nature. Like scales will have just like, they'll be like half one color and half another color. I hope that makes sense. Like you don't have to separate the colors by the scales, I guess.
It's not a paint by number on the scales.
Right. And unfortunately, that's going to take a little bit of time to try as well. Rat, how you doing, buddy?
Bring like
Still
small
a
fan
little
in here.
dry, a little wet. What were you saying? Sorry.
You need to bring like a small fan in here for painting days. So they can
That's
sit
not a
with
bad
you.
idea at all. I'm gonna add some yellow to the fur. So here, okay. So I was wrong. What I thought was yellow ochre is actually dirty yellow. So this is if you guys, any of you out there want to do non-metallic metals, this is like your non-metallic metal gold right here. This is a really good color for that. And again, very vibrant. But that's not what I'm using it for today. Today it's going to be some rat fur. Stay gold, little guy. So even though this is probably, I'm definitely going at this too early. I can still see all the wet ink down there, but if I'm really careful, because this fur is so thick, to kind of make it look matted, if I'm really careful with my dry brushing, I can actually kind of go over that without
Just
picking
hit
up.
the high parts.
Yeah, just the high parts without picking up any of the
So
the
it says
agraks.
that on snakes, the stripes do go by scales though. It's one way to tell ribbon snakes from garter snakes how many scales there are between the belly scutes and the stripes. So
Maybe I'm thinking of a different animal.
it might be that some of the other patterns don't, but like the band specifically.
I think I was thinking more like on a ball python. It has those big, just big black blotches on brown. Yeah. My recollection is that they often, or that separating color goes right down the middle of some of the scales. All right, so this dude is just, he or she is kind of a mess now. Got crazy yellow fur, blue skin. Let's give it yellow teeth too. Why not? Because rodents absolutely are going to have those gross yellow teeth. That's just kind of a given. Then I can find that blue highlight again that I mixed earlier, because I accidentally got some yellow on the ears. Those need to be flesh like everything else. So go with that consistent blue. I also notice a little spot of skin on the back where some of the fur has gone away. And yeah, I do drop models like all the time. Usually because I can't grip them too tight. You see how I'm like rotating it all the time? If I hold on to it too tight, I can't do that. So that just means I have to pick them up off the floor a lot. The only bad part is, if a weapon breaks off and goes bouncing under someplace that you can't see. Oh, that's the worst. I had like my whole family helping me look for this orc weapon from the last foes. Like my sister-in-law and her wife under my table, digging around for this little scimitar.
That's when you go with the G.I. Joe route. Oh, that guy, he lost his arm in a fight.
Yeah, but I didn't want to have to be like, Eric, I lost a scimitar.
Yeah,
Can you please print me another one?
With skeleton, it's got a broken scimitar.
And then of course that was an orc. It was just gone. The whole thing was just gone.
Punching things.
And of course, my wife, who's dealt with this way too much, is basically standing there staring at the two of them like, you shouldn't encourage him. He needs to learn to not drop his models under the table and have them bounce where he can't find them.
I think as a kid, one of my G.I. Joes had lost an arm in the war. The war was actually, the lawnmower because I found the yard. So there was no finding and fixing that one. He just had one arm.
I remember when I was a kid, I figured out how to take my G.I. Joes apart. They had a little screw in the back, and then you could swap their arms out and stuff.
Oh, yeah. And the other thing is, like, if it was my model, I can, like, sculpt a new sword. But because it was for a thing, like, it has to be the right sword.
Oh, it was for display.
Right, exactly. It was for the foes Kickstarter, so we can't just have some made-up sword that I did. All right, so we're back to the...
has a toothpick.
Yeah, we're back to the snake again. So fortunately, the dark rust dried very quickly. And now I'm going to try to go with the light rust and very carefully see if I can do this right. This may actually call for a little bit more paint on the brush. See if I can get the light rust dry brushed on in such a way that it doesn't hit the green scales too much. It gives it a nice bright streak of orange down the back.
Gene says, I dropped all the slimes under my desk. You haven't seen them yet.
Hopefully they haven't divided too many times. That's the last thing you want. And this is working pretty good because, again, man, those scales are just so well defined that even with like a pretty thick paint on my brush, I'm able to just sort of bring it up and down on that and really pick them out. Now, one way, if you really want like an orange like this to pop, sometimes with like oranges, reds, yellows, the best way to get a really, really saturated tone is with another ink wash. And I didn't even think about this until just now. I actually have the only wash that I have bought of the AKs, which it happens to be orange, so we can use it on this. So that's 3 sort of dry brushes of the orange. I'm going to, a good highlight for orange can be a skin tone. So I'm going to use the mid skin tone and just try to go over that real lightly. And then I'm going to see how, after I give it a little bit to dry, of course, how this orange shade might work. Assuming that it is an orange wash. I think it's called transparent orange. All right, well, I don't know. I kind of like that just how it is. Maybe I don't want to mess with that. But let's see, where was it? Oh, clear orange. Yeah, so this is the thing I was thinking about putting on top of those scales is clear orange. Maybe I'll just try it, just to see how it works. What will it do? I need to give it a very specific little place on the wet palette so it doesn't just ooze into everything else. And sometimes you got to shake washes more than anything else because the pigment really has a tendency to settle to the bottom. And then you're basically just brushing on ink medium.
Oh, says the floor under his painting table is grade concrete. I'm sure there's dozens of styrene plastic mini bits down there.
Oh yeah, I have this.
Oh, your
old
gray on
nasty
gray is not
carpet.
hard to find.
All right, clear orange. So will this make it better or worse? Or no change?
What's a vortex mixer?
That's one of those little vibraty things. We had one that was actually Steve's that he brought.
Yeah, Gene said you need to get one like Steve's.
Oh yeah, I've
got
thought
one of
about it.
those. Yeah, they're
I
great.
actually did get a new hobby product just yesterday that I ordered. It has not arrived yet, which is finally going to try to do some water effects with that clear UV resin. The old 2-part water, oh, that stuff is the worst. It has this weird viscosity where it just like seems like it wants to get into everything, both the activator and the just substance itself. So they're super messy, and they really need to be like the exact ratio of like 2-to-1, and if it's off,
Oh, it's like the AB resin.
yeah.
Mixes. Yeah.
But this UV stuff, it's just one thing. It comes the way that I feel like the 2-part waters that I've used in the past should have come, which is it's basically a dropper bottle. And that helps me because I want to use it on little bases. So I can just like put it in the little base, and then it comes with a UV lamp. Put them all under the UV lamp and leave them for a while, and they cure. Sounds awesome. I'm hoping it will be awesome.
I wonder if that's come from the development of resins for the 3D printing. They're just repurposing some of that.
Oh yeah,
Sounds like it.
I've seen lots of people use it with, great effect. So
Cool kind of backport of the technology.
yeah, I didn't even think about that. All right, I'm gonna do a little bit of off-white on Ratso's teeth. You know what? I'm gonna actually jump down one brush size.
Jean says after she saw Steve's vortex mixer at FnordCon, one picked one up, and it works a lot better than the hobby paint shaker she's had for a while.
Maybe I should get that because sometimes it seems like no matter how much I shake a bottle, it just sort of splops out, and I get this gross sort of clotted looking mix of clear goo and pigment, which is not good because even if you stir it back together, it's not the proper ratio. All right, I'm trying to get those pustules on the tongue, man. These poor critters. You know what, let's just make it look a little more agno. I'm going to try to find a way to work a little bit of that frog green I was talking about earlier into some parts of this. Because I've barely used this frog green. I've only sort of used it as like a way to make a highlight look a little bit more interesting. So let's get it in some more places. This is one of the things you can do, just like stipple color around randomly. And for like gross things like this, it can work really well. I think the only problem is the frog green is very yellowish and it has yellow fur, so that may not actually have been the best choice. Because they're sort of conflating a little bit. Like, is it fur or is it weird green? Maybe we can add a few little purple to some of the shadows. You may have noticed, but with this guy, like I said, I like to have a handle. With this guy, I just left some of the architecture from the 3D print behind. And that was my intention with the snake, but he just popped off. Shame on him or her. All right, what else can we do with this rat? It's a little dark in here. It's kind of hard to make out some of the color. I'm doing some highlights now with a little bit of a more fleshy tone. I mean, the goal ultimately with all these different colors is just you want to have them so sort of spread out that you're not really noticing like that part is highlighted pink and that part is highlighted blue. It just sort of creates a sort of a general weird vibe. Let's see. I want to define the little line between the teeth. What is the correct color for that? Let's go with burnt umber. Maybe while I have that out, I can use it to add a little bit of shading to the fur as well. So I don't know if you guys are noticing the snake right now. I don't know if it's still drying or if that clear orange has an incredibly glossy way to it, because that whole orange area is now super shiny.
Yeah, Bo says he really likes the vortex mixer, especially for thick things like Army Painter.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, I've never really had Army Painter work out for me. And one of the things a lot of people have told me is like, no, you have to shake it so hard and so long to really get it good. So that might be part of it. And a vortex mixer would definitely help with that. Let's see if I can get teeny tiny little highlight dot on these red eyes to make them look extra beady. Kind of missed on that one.
Oh, it begins.
We've got thunder.
We
Did
got
anybody
thunder
else hear that?
outside.
I didn't know there was a storm coming until
We're
someone
we're
mentioned
looking
it
at a lot
earlier.
of rain over the next few days.
Good.
Maybe
Yeah.
not a lot of rain, but a lot of chances for rain, I
Oh,
should
okay.
say.
Oh, that's a little different, but
That
still,
it is different. And of course, we live in Austin, so a lot of times clouds just go right around us
Yep. We're just
and
right overhead.
drench everyone else, but not here.
So yeah, Gene says resin casting is the current fad in mainstream crafts. People are making jewelry and stuff by pouring resin into little molds and adding stuff like glitter and curing it. Good for us. All sorts of things we can repurpose.
Yeah, I was gonna like try to see if I could encourage my wife to maybe do some weird little craft things with it. Like putting you can put little pictures, just fun random stuff. Like you just put little pictures in a bottle cap and then put some of that resin over the top and it just looks nifty.
I know cosplayers have been using it for ages, especially if you need to make like gems or anything like that for your costume.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Little
really
gem
specific
belt buckles,
ones.
all the custom like signature bits that you can't get because they're licensed, but if you can sculpt it yourself, you could make one.
Yeah. I mean, that's kind of the whole 3D printing realm. There's so much licensed stuff that you can just go and get and 3D print. I'm just constantly shocked that the IP holders don't try to shut it down more because they sell it too. You know, you can buy all sorts of copyrighted things on Shapeways.
Oh yeah, with 3D printing, it's even easier now. I have not done cosplaying in a while, and that was when I did it. It was before the age of 3D printing, so it was a lot of all right. If you can sculpt your own
Yeah,
thing and then cast that and then resin it and paint it, then you can have a official looking thing, or you can spend hundreds of dollars to try to import one from Japan or whatever.
yeah. I mean, for me, I'm obviously referring to like minis bits, but I mean, all the Disney stuff that has been turned into miniatures games. Like, I'm just shocked that none of their people are trying to shut it down. Maybe they don't see it as being big enough to get into their bottom line. It's really the miniatures companies that are making it, mostly Atomic Mass, that are probably suffering.
Might be hard to keep up with too. It's so easy to just you know, upload a file.
Well, I mean, yeah, you think that, but they're like certain 3D sculptors are just known for doing, you know, like Star Wars stuff, and they have Patreons, and they just create, and they don't call it that, obviously, but
Right.
you know,
If it's different enough that they
but
can
it's not.
avoid-
That's what shocks me though. Is it's really not different enough. It's just like we do. Here's a bunch of stormtroopers, except their heads are bare, but they're like no, they're just stormtroopers. There's nothing else that they could be. Um, but yeah, I mean, like if you're just doing that to paint, like I think that's probably fine, I guess. But I don't think it's okay if you use it as proxies in war games because the reason why those war games exist is because people, you know, invested time and money in making a fun rule set, and they invested time and money in the marketing that creates the communities that play those games. So if you're gonna play them, you really should buy the models and not just 3D print them, even if you can. Because those companies also have to pay a lot in licensing. Like I can't imagine that the Marvel license they pay for MCP is cheap. And there's so many superheroes out there too.
Mhm.
Oh, and there's tons of He-Man stuff. Which again, like I guess if you just want like you know, a barbarian for your D&D party that looks like He-Man, you know, whatever. But there are some actual He-Man minis games that have just sort of cropped up recently. Although those like you can't really just like because you need the board, you need the cards, you need the dice. So I can't imagine people are finding ways to like get around buying all that by 3D printing a couple of He-Mans. So that's probably not as big of a deal.
There are some instances where it might be more economical to do it, but some it's just not.
Yeah. And like X-Wing, right? Like you could 3D print some TIE fighters or whatever, but then you need the cards, you need the bases, you need the movement widgets and
Yeah.
lots of other stuff. So it's like just buy the like $20 ship. It's not
Don't commit intellectual property violations, just
Yeah.
as a general rule.
yeah. It's just like I always it's just such a big part of the miniatures world these days. Like it just seems impossible to not talk about it existing.
Well, I'm not encouraging anyone
No.
to go break copyright or anything, but one cool thing about 3D printing though is you could scale things to different sizes. So
Yeah.
you may not be able to get some of those models at a larger size, but you can 3D print one, which is kind of cool.
Well, I keep telling myself I need to set aside time to try to sculpt some of my own crazy ideas, but then some company I like will release a bunch of new models. Be like, well, shoot, I got to paint those first, man. Got to paint those first.
Yeah, there's so much content out there these days.
Yeah, this orange is dry. It's just super super glossy.
It's a high gloss orange.
So I would say I didn't really gain enough from applying that for it to be worth it. Weirdly, for a company that makes so many like super bright saturated colors, it's not a very bright orange. It turned out a little on the dull side. But yeah, I think I'm getting really close to wrapping these guys up.
I was gonna say,
at least
are
for
either
now.
of them ready to put on the turntable yet?
Oh yeah, let's put the rat on the turntable. I'm over here. Sorry, I gotta remind about the turntable. I'm over here doing little red dots for Snakeo's eyes.
Yep, that rat needs to go to the vet.
Yeah.
He needs to go an opposite direction from me is where he needs to go.
So I've done some pink on the inside of the snake's mouth, and now I've kind of created a little wash of the wine red and the dark rust. Sort of put over that. I'm so used to painting between my legs. I have like the absolute worst posture when I paint. And
Gene
this
says-
table is just like, makes it so confusing.
Jean says, giant rat minis always seem to look way too sleek, so she told Spyros that we wanted mean and mangy, and he really came through on that.
Yeah. And this is like a well-fed rat too. Whatever it has